What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carry inside. Mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. Tonight, I'm doing a Bernie-centric show. Although I'm not personally organizing for Bernie on the ground this year, I am going to be doing a series of shows. And if you watched me last week on Saturday night, I was live streaming the opening of his volunteer office here in Highland Park in Los Angeles, and I covered a honk and wave. And tonight, I'm doing a show on canvassing with two Bernie super volunteers. Directly next to me is Ava Kennedy, and next to her is Matthew Snyder. How are you guys doing tonight?
Great. Thank you for inviting us. Great. I love the show. Thank you so much for letting me on.
Oh, sure. So I'm going to read their bios for you right now. Matthew Snyder is a continuing lecturer in the university writing program at UC Riverside. He's an activist as well, becoming involved in the anti-war movement at the outset of the Iraq War, and later became a core member of Occupy Riverside. In 2012, he co-founded the 28ers, which surfaced from the ashes of Occupy Riverside. For the last 7 years, the 28ers.org has put on monthly events every 28th of the month in the Inland Empire to talk about a different issue, distorted and destroyed by money and politics. He was a super volunteer for Bernie 2016 in the Inland Empire, and more recently started a podcast called The Future is a Mixtape about designing a utopian future. Now, Ava is an engineering recruiter who owns her own business, Precise Tech Recruiting, in Lake County, California. She was a super volunteer for Bernie and a National Sanders delegate, as was I. Let's start with Ava. Tell us why you supported Bernie in 2016, and had you been active in campaigns before, and what exactly did you do for him?
Before I could vote, I campaigned for Eugene McCarthy in Oklahoma. And then I got discouraged by that and ended up becoming a meditation teacher for most of my life. But then I ran for office in Oklahoma. I ran for Congress in Oklahoma in 1996 as an independent. And I got to know a lot of other third-party people that were coming up and trying to get noticed then. So I was in third-party politics for 8 years in the 90s. And then I sort of joined Bernie in January of 2016 and ran to be delegate and, was active that way, and also organized my county, Lake County, for canvassing, and just we had a lot of stimulation.
Why don't you tell us where Lake County is? Because I didn't know, and I had to have you explain it to me.
We're like 2 hours north of San Francisco, but that's due north. So we're like an hour north of Santa Rosa. We're actually the poorest county in California. That's has a recent designation. And the largest city in Lake County is Clear Lake. And that is where I've been trying to focus my efforts recently.
Great. Well, so it sounds like an ideal county for Bernie. Why don't you tell us answer the questions for your county, Matthew? Well, actually for yourself, how you got involved in the campaign, if you had ever been active before, what you like about Bernie, and what you did for him.
Yeah, so like most people that follow politics, I was a political window watcher for most of my life, kind of looking out the window, seeing what was going on. And I'd moved between the Green Party and kind of lowly embracing the Democratic Party here and out. I was excited initially by Obama, but I had fallen in love with Bernie Sanders from the anti-war movement in 2003. And that's when I discovered, oh my God, this is someone that's incredible, actually believes in policies. And so when Bernie announced to run, I was already knee deep in activism from Occupy and the 28ers, which we'd formed out of Occupy. So we took a leadership role in the Riverside County Inland Empire. We did the first fundraiser for Bernie Sanders, July 18, 2015. And we did it with Progressive Democrats for America, Latinos for Bernie, and the 28ers. And we did about a dozen events for Bernie Sanders. I was almost a delegate, but I had a family schedule conflict. And so I was really involved with Bernie all the way through. I was organizing on campus at UC Riverside with students to try to get them involved, get out the vote. We did a lot of registration. So we were quite involved and active in the movement in Riverside County. And we did events in San Bernardino County, which makes up the Inland Empire.
Let's talk about the biggest issues affecting both of your counties. And also how the county went in the primary, Bernie versus Hillary, and then how it went in the general, Hillary versus Trump. Let's start with you, Ava.
Okay, well, I'd say the biggest issues facing our counties, my county right now, is, I'm going to say, poverty. Even in the more affluent parts of the county, we also have people are suffering from the fires that we've had recently and trying to rebuild homes. And a lot of the businesses in my town of Middletown have gone out of business. So we are perfect for the Bernie campaign, and we're a rural county. We're considered a rural county, and there's certain characteristics and benefits from that. We're very different from what people think of California as in general. And I think it's really an opportunity to get to the voters that are not voting, have not registered to vote, or are not participating in our system. And so that's why we're a perfect county for that. And we voted in the primary, we voted for Bernie, 55.7% for Bernie and 42.7% for Hillary. And then in the general election, we voted 47% for Hillary and 43% for Trump. So there were a lot of Bernie voters that ended up not voting for Hillary, or a lot, I think, did vote for Trump in our county.
Wow. Well, see, that's what we're always being accused of. But instead of looking at it as an accusation, I think what the Democratic Party needs to do is try to understand why that is and realize that if they want to win, then they need to make sure Bernie gets the nomination. And it seems to me they're doing everything they can to sabotage him yet again, along with their partners in crime, the mainstream corporate media. And that is because Bernie challenges corporations and billionaires who are the very donors to the Democratic Party and also the very advertisers on the media. So why don't I put that question to you, Matthew? Tell us about the biggest issues affecting your county and how the split went in the primary and in the general.
Sure, thanks, Lauren. The big issue in the Inland Empire, which I jokingly call the New Jersey of Southern California, is essentially logistics warehouses and pollution. We're up with Dallas and Houston as the most polluted air quality area or region in the United States. And we have a lot of low wage jobs and a lack of health care. It's a very working class community. It's about 1.6 million voters in San Bernardino County and Riverside County, which basically makes up the two counties as the Inland Empire. And so those are big issues in our area. And we didn't have that kind of support we were hoping in California, but especially in our area, we had to create our own grassroots office in California, the Inland Empire area, because there wasn't enough money. And so we ended up not being able to canvass nearly as much. So in Riverside, Hillary won by about 56%, and Bernie won by 43%. In San Bernardino, it was a little bit closer. It was 44% for Bernie and 55% for Hillary Clinton. So San Bernardino has about a 50,000 edge in terms of voting registration for Democrats, where there's about a 13% edge in Riverside County for registered Republicans. So that's changed since then. And Riverside, the city itself, is a more Democratic than Republican. So we just didn't have enough support to do the canvassing and the outreach. And so we weren't able to buckle through because we have a good amount of non-party preference voters that we could have pulled through and brought in.
That leads me to my next question, which you sort of answered, which was what did the campaign do right in 2016 and what did they do wrong? And you've already answered the second part, Matt, that they didn't provide enough resources. And I will tell viewers that that was a problem throughout California. I was the lead organizer of Los Angeles for Bernie, which was a very large volunteer organization in California. And I know from being very attuned to the political press that when Bernie came into California, he had $6.9 million in the bank. And everyone knows that Bernie is very frugal and he's not embarrassed to say so. I heard an anecdote the other day that he walked into his Washington, D.C. office and saw too many people sitting around and said, we got to let some of these people go. So he doesn't want to be in debt, you know, and this is a story that is common to people who grew up poor. And, you know, he always says how his parents were fighting about money. So he was very concerned about that. And what's very sad is that, you know, they had 100 field organizers in New Hampshire, but they only had 50 in California, which is the largest state in the country with the most delegates. There were only 5 campaign offices, and I believe that 2 of them were staffed by volunteers. And they had fired something like 191 organizers after New York when he lost that primary. And yet they spent $2 million of that 6.9 advertising on TV in California, which everybody knows is not enough to spend to make any kind of dent. And if they had taken that $2 million, they could have hired back all those field organizers and fanned them out all over California. So I wanted to ask you, Ava, what do you think the campaign did right in 2016 and what could they have done better?
Yeah, just something that Matthew was bringing up about NPP voters. This was one thing that I'm not saying our campaign did wrong. It's just in the primary elections, we registered a lot of people before the primary as NPP voters. And, you know, we encouraged them to register Democrat, but tons of people were disillusioned. They registered NPP or for whatever reason. And it turned out that because the instructions were not clear to NPP voters when they arrived at the polls that if they wanted to vote for president, they had to request a crossover presidential ballot. It turned out that there were tons of people that actually NPP voters that went to the polls but never voted for anybody for president. And in our county, it was like 82%. And then I was looking up the numbers in our county, I looked up for the whole state. And, you know, it was 3.4 million voters were NPP voters that went to the polls and did not ever vote for any presidential candidate. One thing, as we're registering people to vote, I can't say we did wrong. It's just we tried our best to educate people about NPP, but we've got to be way ahead of the game this time.
Yeah, that was a problem. And we know that the registrar, especially in Orange County, was not training the workers properly, the poll workers, that they needed to let people know that they could ask for a Democratic crossover ballot, but instead they were handing out provisional ballots. Now, I also want to correct a record that I think a lot of people have a misconception that provisional ballots are not counted in California. They most certainly are. In California, unlike other states, it's not a way to disenfranchise you, it's a way to franchise you. And I know that in Los Angeles County, because I have a friend who worked for the registrar of voters, there were only 1,400 provisional ballots that were not counted. And that's because those people were legitimately not registered to vote.
It has nothing to do with provisional ballots. It's actually, they went to the polls to vote and they were handed a ballot that included everything but the presidential candidates. And it wasn't that they were given provisional ballots. They did vote, but they walked out and kind of thought, why weren't there any presidential candidates on that ballot?
I don't think you can say that you know that that's why they didn't vote. I'm sure there's a lot of NPP voters that didn't like any of their choices.
Definitely. Oh, of course. Yeah.
And also, I'm sure that these people are not stupid. If they wanted to vote for president, there's nothing to prevent them from going to the poll worker and saying, why doesn't my ballot not have the presidential choice on there?
Well, I did talk to a lot of people, Lauren, after after the election. People came up to me and said, Ava, I wanted to vote for Bernie, but he wasn't on the ballot. I couldn't figure out what it was. So this is just something I think we need to be alert to. You were talking about, this is maybe it's a very important point. It's not that if you want your vote for Bernie to count, it's really best to be registered as a Democrat.
Yes. And also the American Independent Party is a big problem too.
Yes.
As well.
I'm going to be having hopefully one of their officers on my show, because they told me that of their candidates, of their 342,000, or maybe they have 500,000, I don't have the numbers in front of me, registered members, something like 100,000 people wrote in Trump and 44,000 wrote in Bernie. So there's 44,000 people right there that are in the wrong party. They thought they were independent with a small I, and yet they're in this conservative party. Did you hear that a lot in Riverside County, Matthew, about the NPP issue?
Yeah, it was a huge problem for us because you have to remember, and when we look back at 2016, California was kind of the car crash at the end, because literally found out the day before. My students are telling me, and I'm finding out too, that they have all the super delegates rounded up on the day before the election. And so all my students who were excited to show up and vote, who had registered, just felt like they didn't want to vote because it was already decided. And so we had a low turnout in that regard. That was a massive tragedy that was contributed by mainstream media trying to bully the election into an endgame. And as a result, a lot of my students weren't prepared. They didn't show up to vote. We didn't have a strong education drive. Bernie did not educate the millennials on how to vote, where to vote, where to be, how to check your ballots, all of that. There was an educational gap in the campaign about how to register voters and how to make sure that your vote was counted, because you get a slip at the end saying, here's your receipt, check it and make sure it was counted. And a lot of students showed up with they're being purged. They had to put in a provisional ballot, and they either didn't get the receipt or didn't go in. And there was a great deal of confusion for students that still wanted to vote. And I would say definitely of the problems, the most frustrating thing when it comes to voting registration is the confusion about NPP and the independent party. That has to be clarified and changed in the state of California. It creates way too much confusion. And once again, we certainly often need to tell students that they need to register as a Democrat right out the door, because we'll have more protection that way than we would be as an NPP or mistakenly as an independent party, where you can't register because you're an independent party, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a great deal of confusion. So one of the big things is telling students how and where to vote, how to check that vote. We didn't have anyone set up. We just wantonly thought, okay, maybe they'll be nice to us this time. And so we didn't have a recall or a vote count, armed guards checking the ballots when they're voting, when things were getting purged in San Diego and other areas. And we saw cheating in the Inland Empire too as well. So I feel like the Berners need to get together and make sure that we have a force to not just educate, but also to make sure that we count those votes and make sure they're counted accurately.
Well, I know that we did get a list of those independents, that American Independent Party, and we were contacting them. So that is something they have to do again. But I also remember that Bernie did 3 weeks worth of rallies here, going up and down the state, and he never did talk about how to vote for him.
Yes.
And, obviously it's not as sexy a message as, the top 3 families have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50%, which he loves to say, but it is something that's kind of crucial information if we want to do something about the fact that
that's
the bottom.
That's a good idea, Lauren.
Yeah.
And it should be pitched at the end of the speeches. Like at the end of the speeches is about how do we enact that vote. One of the things I like that I was saying too is that this can be done quite well by candidates. Is getting out the vote and saying how you vote, how to make sure you're registered, how to check your receipts, especially in California where you can vote provisional same day.
Yeah, you know, Bernie has a really good video team, and I'm going to suggest that. One of the guys who's on that team is a Facebook friend of mine. So I'm going to suggest that maybe they make a cute little video about how to vote for him. Let me ask you a question about students, since you're a teacher. One of the things that we found is that students were confused, and many of them were registered where they live. And when they went to vote, you know, where their school was located, they found that they weren't on the rolls. Did you find that was a problem in Riverside?
Yeah, because it's just chaotic. You have students that are transferring, that are moving from one campus to the other, and they just think that when they move to their dorms or a new house that their voting registration follows their change of address. And it doesn't necessarily do that. So that was something that was really key, was that we made sure that students knew where they were actually registered first before we went ahead and did the registration change for a change of address. So on the campus, in terms of campus life at the UC system, especially UCR, there wasn't a lot of activities outside of what my student club did, the 28ers at UCR, or what college Democrats did. There was just a lot of memeing, a lot of Facebook posts, but not a lot of canvassing grassroots stuff, not a lot of rallies up to June. And so that was something we could have done much better on our part at the campus, is not just, you know, make sure students are able to change their address, but also get them vocally active in and getting Bernie into any event that was up about politics.
Yeah, I remember I put up a Facebook page, although it was too late and it wasn't shared by enough people, but it was called, you know, Bring 10 Voters to the Polls. It was like a contest because millennials are notorious for, you know, screwing up. I shouldn't say millennials, maybe college students, you know, like 70 to 90% of them supported Bernie, but only 20% of them actually voted. So if you make it like a contest, and I even reached out to the Sanders campaign, of course I got no answer back, but I thought maybe we could make it like you will be flown to Vermont to have dinner with Bernie or something, like whoever gets the most people out, and they needed to collect receipts that these people, right?
They should use gamification aspects in voting and corralling the vote. So that's one thing they could do, is use a lot of the game technology, game theory aspects of like having stars and rankings to get students to show up and tell who's taking them. So like, you know, like you're saying that you're on Facebook, you're somewhere where you're at the voting booth with your friends and you tag them. And so that's going to be key, is using that digital technology to put us back in the physical space. And let's be fair to millennials. Gen X, we're the Switzerland generation. My generation, we didn't have a baton pass for them. We're having to start all over again to build grassroots and great physical belonging. And my generation just, you know, we did reality bites and a Nirvana video, but we didn't really create long-term belonging and long-term grassroots struggles. And the socialist movement has been decimated for 40 years. So it's not like we gave them much to begin with. And so we can learn this and do this better in 2020.
Yeah, and also we have to have at least a representative, if not a paid representative, a volunteer representative on every campus, letting students know one thing, that Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who is willing to absolve your student debt.
Debt jubilee.
You know, if you want a hook to get someone, and just a simple little flyer or a card or a game or whatever, it's got to be about the student debt, because that is so huge.
It was huge. When Bernie announced that he was doing debt absolution, that was glorious, because that's the universalization of socialist policies, and that's when they're most effective. Nobody wants to go through the numbers and say, okay, a Warren's going to save you up to 50,000. When you just say we're going to end this nightmare, it's just a huge change in the paradigm of human psychology. And so the students are down for debt absolution. They're down for debt jubilee. And remember, some of the very first revolts in human societies were burning temples that was recording debt, you know, credit-based debt. You know, burning the temples was about getting rid of the debt, and it's time that we burn the debt up.
Now, one of the things I want to talk about is this outreach to non-voters or low propensity voters, which happen to be poor people. And I think I mentioned on a previous show that we started a low-income outreach program. And the idea was to go to Walmarts and Targets and 99-cent stores and check cashing places and payday lenders and say to these people, you know, maybe you don't vote because you don't think politicians care about you, and you're right, most of them don't, but Bernie is a public servant, not a politician. He spent his whole life caring about you. And the reason I wanted to have you in particular on the show, Ava, is that you posted that you were doing exactly that you were tabling at Walmart. So can you talk about your rationale and what exactly that program is for people that want to copy it?
Yes, well, Clear Lake is a poor city and great people. And I realized once when I was in the Taco Bell in Clear Lake, I had on a Bernie shirt, and about a month ago, and people said, "Oh, is Bernie running?" And that is a common response there. And so I just went into the Walmart and asked if I could have a voter registration table. I said I was from the Bernie Citizens for Bernie. I just made that up. I was from Citizens for Bernie, and I wanted to have a voter registration table. And she got in touch with the manager. The manager came, and then I signed a form, very simple, about the rules. And you can just register a day at least 2 or 3 days in advance. You know, somebody told me another Walmart in California said no politics, but I think you just have to try, and you can try any of these dollar stores or grocery outlet and any place where lots of people come that might not go to other events that might require a little bit more money. And what I found was all I had was a very simple table with Bernie, 1 or 2 Bernie signs, and I said register to vote and free pocket constitution. We handed out these pocket constitutions that we had pasted voter information on. So what I found by these people would just stop by the table. I wasn't aggressive about making people stop. They would just stop, and a lot of people would just wave and say thank you or go Bernie. But really, there were a lot of people that really didn't even know Bernie was running. They almost all knew Bernie. And many people were not registered to vote, and we were able to register them. AOC said we need to get the vote of people that are not currently participating in the voting process. And this is really how to get them. Like, I registered a 30-year-old guy who was really into Bernie, but he had never registered to vote. Even if you live in a more well-to-do area, don't always go to the most well-to-do part of town to do your canvassing. You want to pick up a lot of people that may not be as aware.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I wanted to ask you about your opinion, Matthew. But first, I want to put up this comment by Roshan here, who is a Los Angeles for Bernie volunteer. I don't know if you knew that, but that was his impression, that UC Riverside registered more students to vote than any other UC.
Oh, Russian, that's an old student of mine. Well, I wasn't a student of mine, but he worked in our chapter student club. And yeah, we did register more than any other UC school. So that was something that I don't blow my horn about, but something that we did do. We had weekly sign up, and we were really pushing. And it was kind of exciting and then depressing, because you have fantasies of a revolution at 40, and you want people out on the streets, and you want to have a college campus environment. So we were doing the registration, but there weren't the kind of beautiful rallies that I wanted from the 60s, so, like at UC Berkeley. So I wanted this to be accompanied by a parade and by confetti, but we were doing the nitty gritty of getting the people registered. So thanks for Roshan for mentioning that.
Now tell me about your canvassing efforts this year. You mentioned that you're starting already, that the campaign hasn't reached out to you, even though the campaign hired 5 people at the end of May.
I feel like the Bernie campaign's 2 months behind. Number one, Bernie should have announced first. He didn't need to wait. It doesn't mean he doesn't have to announce all of his issues right away, but you're slowing down the time that the grassroots needs to build a national movement. And that's the big problem is we're 2 months behind, and we have the friend-to-friend voting browser and a canvas aspect to that browser. Now, the problem with those that I'm finding right now is it's kind of half-assed. So we have a host guide for canvassing. We have the 7 or 8 principles to be a canvasser for Bernie and Bernie's team about decorum and principles and strategies for talking to people. But the problem is there's no vans, GPS, so we can't do precinct walks. I had to print stuff off of my computer from Google. And so we were kind of just going by hand and blindly walking the streets, knocking on doors. And we've done 2 canvassing events. One was in late June and one was in early July. And we don't have the Vans app that was being used for distributive campaigning back in late May. And so it's kind of bonkers that they have a webinar training, they have all the other stuff, but they don't have brochures. They didn't have a Canvas script. So I had to actually write my own Canvas script for a fellow Berners. And I had to come up with my own maps to knock on doors. And that's not something we should be doing. That should be aggressively put in our hands as activists to go out and do.
Have you heard from anyone in the campaign up there, Ava?
Well, yes, Claire Lau is meeting with us a little bit later in a week or two. And so that's good. She's the Northern California director. For
viewers who don't know, Claire Lau is probably the best hire they made in California. She is one of the San Francisco Bernie-crat leaders, and she's just a powerhouse organizer. So any of you who are watching from Northern California know that you are in good hands.
Just on the precinct walking thing, and I was kind of interested that Matthew felt they were lacking because they didn't have the precinct maps, because when I really fought, of course, we had just had the fires and none of the precinct maps were mostly not that accurate, but I fought to not go by those maps, which I felt took time in between each house that was valuable, and I just wanted to go door to door. And finally, I sort of got quiet permission. It said, don't tell anybody else, but okay, you can do that. And at the People's Summit, Bernie talked about that, and he said, knock on every damn door. So it's not like this is just, I appreciate your view. My view is somehow we spend time like finding these Democratic precinct lists and finding the next house and asking for a specific voter, that we're really can just be knocking on every damn door.
No, if I can speak, Ava, I would probably give a little bit more details of what I mean. When I'm talking about the precincts, I think you're right. We should be knocking on every door. But the problem is, I'm a psycho crazy for Bernie, and I want to map the whole damn city for him. And of other people canvassing, I don't want other people canvassing areas on different months that we've already covered. I want the entire city of Riverside to be pummeled by Berners. And the problem with the precinct map and the app is we're not creating a database for those we've already contacted.
Yes,
and we're going to be the 4th state. So let's start building that database on who we've knocked, who we've talked to, and those sorts of things.
Well, let me ask you about that, because we had that issue in 2016. We had a canvassing team, and they said to me, Lauren, they're asking us to, skip these houses and only go to likely Democratic voters. And we all had a feeling even back then that likely Democratic voters were going to go to Hillary. And we wanted to go to non-likely Democratic voters and independents and, non-voters.
Yes.
So people just kind of ignored what they were supposed to do, the maps that were made up, and they just did their own thing. But this year, I understand they're doing something a little bit differently, and I want to ask you guys about it, because I spoke to one of our big super volunteers, Isaac Lieberman, and July 4th, he was going to be trying to canvass at this big 4th of July concert at the Warner Center, where they get like 40,000 people. And I said, Isaac, they're going to be wanting to drink and listen to music. They're not exactly going to want to be hearing about Bernie Sanders. And he said, no, Lauren, anytime there's 40,000 people, I am not going to pass up the opportunity to educate them about Bernie Sanders. So I said, well, just hold the light board. You know, they have the light board with the little lights that light up and say Bernie 2020.
Cute.
But anyway, he was telling me that the strategy right now is called voter identification rather than persuasion. So they just want to find out who voted for Bernie, and it's sort of like on a scale of 1 to 6. Are you very likely, less likely, not at all? Who else are you considering? They kind of want to identify their voters, and then maybe in the fall they want to get into persuasion. And I'm just hoping that's not going to be too late.
That.
You do like that?
I like the idea that they're rating the voters as to sort of degree of how are theirs, because that does seem to be accurate. There are some people that are gung-ho for Bernie, and then some that are kind of having some other thoughts, and it's good to know that.
Well, I think that it's actually, I didn't like it at first, but then I started to realize it's probably okay for the first couple of months, because one of the things I don't like about the web browser app is it asks for people's name and information right away. So I told all the canvassers not to ask for people's private information, start a conversation about what issues matter to them. And the browser app goes through, like, what are important issues for you? What are you concerned about? So just like listening to them, and that's beautiful. And then I added an extra bit to that, which is tell them about issues that matter to you and things that you're thinking about. And so to create that relationship of personal storytelling is really a Marshall Gaughan's strategy for winning the future. So I'm sort of okay for this for the first couple of months. And then I had the canvassers ask for information once we had sold an emotional connection to them, that we had brought them in, and I was surprised how much longer the conversations were than if I went up and said, will you vote for Bernie?
Right.
Because the blinders go up, the negativity, the fear goes up. To just be listened to at your door is a powerful thing. And so I actually do think it works.
Well, you've obviously studied Marshall Gans, and I took a class with him about this. And there's also a great video. It was one of the Facebook Watch videos called Deep Canvassing.
Yes.
And it was about how they were canvassing for Democrats in Trump country for the midterms. And obviously, if they came to the door and the first thing they said was vote for this Democrat, they wouldn't have a conversation. So the first question they asked was, what is the most important issue to you? And depending on what the person said, the canvasser would then relate it to themselves. Like if the woman said, you know, health care because I can't afford my health care, then she could say something like, well, I mean, presuming it's true, not make stuff up, but yeah, you know, my mom has lymphoma and you know, she had a really hard time. So like you say, Matthew, you establish that relationship where you have trust and shared values. And from there, you can have a longer conversation. But that's what they call persuasion. And my only worry is that if we wait too long to get to persuasion, what with all these debates, we're having more in July, and then we're going to narrow down the field and have some in September. I feel that it's much harder to get someone to switch from a candidate they've already decided on than to get someone to make that decision in the first place. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I just like to talk to people and get to know them. I wouldn't call it persuasion. Actually, I'm a recruiter. I don't rate high on persuasive skills. I rate high on service. So I think that is what Bernie rates high on. And I think that we need to just be talking to people, finding out what their views are, and sincerely caring about their views, and just naturally bringing in Bernie because that's how we've come to it. So I think persuasion is never really that effective. I think it's really getting to, like you guys have been talking about, getting to know people and really connecting with what's really important in their lives.
The framing of mutual suffering and vulnerability are really powerful. Like one of the doors, which was really interesting that I knocked on, was a woman who, and this will blow your mind if you're politically literate, or especially me if you teach rhetoric and persuasion, as well as just basic civics courses I have to sometimes teach. And she loved Bernie in 2016, and she loved his anti-establishment critique. And so when he caved and didn't run third party as I wanted him to, and didn't vote Jill Stein, this tax accountant, older woman, she was going to vote for Jill Stein if she was on 50 states. And I'm like, oh, wow, she's really left. And then she said, well, I'm a Trump supporter now.
Mm.
Right. And so it's people don't fit in these cute little boxes that we think. They pull towards feelings of vulnerability, honesty, integrity. They're tired of the crap. And she was looking for an anti-establishment candidate.
That ties in exactly with what happened with me this weekend. This one woman came up and she had a Trump hat on, and she came up and she just said, you know what? I am a staunch Trump supporter, but I just wanted to tell you that of all the other candidates, Bernie is my very favorite because he's sincere. He speaks for the heart. He goes fully into what he's talking about. He stands up. That was her word. He stands up.
Yes.
And as she walked away, she said, and let me tell you, all my friends who are Trump supporters, they all feel the same way.
That's why we would have won.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know, because you said staunch Trump supporter. So you have to think, if they really like Bernie, but they're a staunch Trump supporter, if it was Bernie versus Trump, maybe they still would have voted for Trump, even though they liked Bernie.
You know what I think, Lauren, is that a lot of these people will continue to vote for Trump, and a lot of these people will vote for Bernie. So I don't know who or which, but as that woman walked away and she just said, and all my Trump friends, they like Bernie a lot too. They like his sincerity, his straightforwardness, the fact that he really stands up. So these are qualities that Trump supporters can switch to Bernie.
We never got Bernie and Donald Trump to debate each other, which would have been remarkable because they both talk like working class people. They have a working class syntax. And Bernie is the water to the fire. And if you want to make that contrast, you go, wait a sec. This guy hasn't done all these awful things to his family or friends. And he talks about economic populism. And he voted for these things. And he sounds just like Trump, but he feels more authentic and honest. And so they have to go back to the record because the way they talk, the way they make eye contact, the way they are blunt, right? That appeals to working class voters and people that are tired of the academic bullshit.
Yeah.
And no one said anything about socialism.
Yeah.
That kind of leads me to my next question is, what are the biggest, when you're canvassing, both of you, what are the biggest questions that you get about Bernie, or the biggest objections? And we'll start with you, Matthew.
Well, one of them was that for people that were either far left or politically confused, that he caved. And I can't trust him because he caved in 2016. And they can't trust him or they won't work with him. So that's one of the things. The other thing is just that he's a socialist, and we can go on and on about whether he can frame that or ignore it. We've obviously changed the conception of that since 2016. And, the Overton window's on fire. There is no center. It's on fire. It's dying. There's just the left. There's eco-socialism and fascism. There is no real Overton window. And when you talk to people, there's going to be people that are just frightened of the word socialism and they can't get out of it. But those are the two things: that he either caved and I can't trust him, or that he's a socialist.
Well, do you feel that if socialism is framed as an FDR-style Democrat, as he tried to do when he talked about fulfilling FDR's economic Bill of Rights, which is exactly what he is trying to do you think that makes it more palatable?
Absolutely. It's a brilliant strategy. I mean, he brought back the second Bill of Rights with the speech on democratic socialism, right? Which people don't know about. A lot of people don't know that that there was another way, another future if FDR had lasted longer, which was the second Bill of Rights, which looks a lot like a kind of UN Charter for Human Rights with a socialist promises that the state will fill in the gaps that the market doesn't meet.
And there's just a lot of voters that don't even really even watch TV or follow politics that much, or don't even know about socialism or whatever. Really, these are the people we have to kind of pull from the non-voting, non-political, non-attentive, and kind of bring them to awareness, like hello, you can register to vote. It's really important that you participate. We worry a lot about what is said about Bernie on MSNBC and CNN. A lot of these people haven't even heard that. They're just like, they know Bernie and they just need a little encouragement, and that's all we need to do.
A little push. Because
a little push.
A little push. Because look, we're looking at so many votes on the table. 45% of the electorate did not vote in 2016. That was a 24-year low in voting. So we just have to look at all these people that are not active. One of the things I often tell fellow students that I train is that the role of an activist is to be like a diver and to submerge yourself under the water to pull people out of the wreck and to pull them to the surface into the sunlight. And that's really what we're doing. We're just trying to pull people out of this quiet, dark misery and just push them to the light. And that's all we're doing, because there are so many people that are politically just dejected and rejected. And we have our first chance with someone who's beautifully authentic and really believes in something. And I'm 43. I've never seen and had this kind of experience in a candidate. And so I will do what I can.
And, you know, it is beautiful to watch these simple people just kind of realize, oh, I could actually vote for somebody and maybe it could make a difference, you know, just to sort of wake up that one little level.
Yes.
And it may be different in a rural county like mine. And
no, I totally agree, because I'm in a giant suburb that wants to be a city, and there is a huge lack of civic engagement, civic awareness. California is horrible about political literacy. I mean, in the state K through 12 system. So it's not like Vermont or Washington State. I'm from Washington State, and civic engagement's much stronger and much more powerful than the state of California. And so, yeah, I think we don't realize the potential to really create not a 51% plus kind of constituency, but a transformational political revolution. And when Bernie says that, I used to laugh about that. I was like, oh yeah, this is what political revolution is? I'm a social anarchist. But if you think about it, if you actually had 70% of the population voting and in the streets and active and participating in daily democracy, that would be a political revolution.
Yeah, you know, I was just telling somebody, I went to a thing yesterday and they talked about healthcare in Cuba. And it's a really interesting program. The Martin Luther King Drew Hospital here in South LA is sending their students who are, you know, med students over there to study how Cuba is doing it, training ordinary people to be doctors. And they're going around the world providing free doctors to the world. And this is the country that we feel is such a threat, because this is their biggest export is doctors. And I was saying that when I was in Cuba, even though they have one party there, they have so much more democracy than we have, because the citizens are very involved. You can run for being a member of the party on the local level, on the provincial level, and on the national level. And everybody is very involved there. And that's what we don't have, because we don't have a democracy here. We have an oligarchy where it's moneyed interests that tell the politicians what to do, which is why, you know, Nancy Pelosi is bucking the progressive wing of the party and why she has to go. But it's just so, it really makes you cynical. And you can understand why people don't vote, because they see that politicians just don't represent them. Now,
but Lauren, that is exactly your point there. That's exactly why Bernie keeps, instead of going into a lot of plans and policies, he keeps going back to the same basic message that why should 3 families own more than most of the population? And people are bored with his stump speech, but he's reaching to pull these people that this is the message that they all refer to as, you know, the income inequality and the, so Bernie knows what he's doing.
I totally agree, because that's something the Republican Party's been doing for 40 years is sound bites and branding and short phrases. There was once a commentator that said that the Republican Party is the party of the complex sentence. I'm sorry, the Republican Party is the party of the simple sentence, and the Democratic Party is the party of the complex sentence. And one of the interesting things about that is Bernie speaks these things again and again because it has to be done to cut through all the garbage. And
Exactly.
my academic colleagues might find Bernie boring and not flashy and suave because he can't make these intersectional comments that an academic would. But that's not what's actually worked in the past. You know, Obama did a very beautiful, complex speech on race in America. But, you know, at the end of the day, he was the president where the most black wealth was lost because of the foreclosure crisis.
Right,
So,
right.
So people want to cut through the kind of the pablum of the punditry class. They know they're operating with the interest of the oligarchy anyways.
Let me ask you about, because you mentioned, Ava, plans and policies, which leads me to my last question about Elizabeth Warren. People are very worried about her because she's drawing voters away from Bernie. And in the last, morning consult, CNN poll, I think it was, showed that she jumped above Bernie, 19% to his 13%, tying her with Kamala Harris, who is such a phony. My hashtag for her is counterfeit Kamala, because everything she says is the opposite of what she's done in her record. And thank God she has a record, because when that comes out, it's going to make Joe Biden look like a saint. Not really, but
Lauren,
I just wanted to ask you, because Elizabeth Warren is drawing a lot of people away, and the demographic and the people who are voting for Elizabeth Warren are women, they're highly educated, they're upper income, and I forget what the fourth thing was, but, and men, and for Bernie, it's mostly men, it's lower income and not so educated. And I am not that category. I'm the category that supposedly supports Elizabeth Warren, as I know a lot of people are. But nonetheless, she is perceived as progressive. I think she's progressive. I think she's done some wonderful things. She's not as strong as Bernie, of course. But I don't know that I would go as far as to call her a neoliberal reformist.
Yes, she's not.
So I really think the important thing here is that we keep our eyes on the prize. And we have the most outstanding candidate in every way. And there are going to be lots of ups and downs in the campaign. Elizabeth Warren is going to rise up. Biden is rising up and down. All of these, Kamala Harris is getting her, day to shine. So these are ups and downs that we're going to be experiencing, but we just need to be confident about our candidate. And when I'm talking to other people that may be interested in Elizabeth Warren and her policies, I think it's really important to be very respectful of people that are thinking that clearly and deeply about the campaign. And, we can bring up different ways that Bernie has of doing some of those things, but really, I think the important thing as Bernie supporters and representatives of Bernie, that we just really let other people have their views and fish around and talk about other candidates. And then just naturally, we support Bernie. However we do, it will come out in the conversation.
Great.
But I'm not really worried about any other candidate because we really have the strongest candidate.
Well, we've gone very much longer than I had intended to. So, Matthew, I'm going to give you the last word as I put up your website so people can know where to follow you.
Yeah, I would close by saying Elizabeth Warren is only a concern if we get deep into the election cycle. That's the only concern with that. Because, once again, a lot of the academics that I meet, they think that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie are exactly the same progressives because they're also low information voters to some degree too. They don't look up all the voting records. They know some of the policies between Warren and Sanders, but the foreign policy is shockingly different between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And
yes.
Warren was a Republican up until 1996, and she's never legitimately, honestly told me why she was a Republican that long, why Reagan was ravaging folks of color and the working class, even though she was a master debater in college. So I don't entirely trust her.
She was an apolitical Republican. Read Ryan Grimm's book.
Yeah, I still am not sold on that. But once again, I think that Warren is not a neoliberal. She's a classical liberal. She's strong on Wall Street. So I think we should, once again, have them both in the race because maybe something might happen with Bernie's health. We're going to need a backup plan. And if Hillary voters are voting for Warren, thank God. That's an improvement. That's an improvement. I mean, if the Hillary voters are all going around Warren rather than Harris, oh my God, I'll be so happy with that, because that's still much better as a backup plan.
All right. Well, we have to leave it here. I'm going to say goodbye to you both so I can promote my next show. But I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for all the good work that you have done and all the work that you're going to be doing for the rest of the year and hopefully into next November.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Great. Okay. It was fun.
So my next show, which is going to be on Tuesday, is going to be focusing on Gavin Newsom and what a disappointment he's turned out to be. Specifically, we're going to talk about how over the long weekend, the long holiday weekend, he railroaded through this bill to bail out PG&E that is being considered almost as bad as the Enron debacle. And we're going to be getting into that with Adam Scow from Consumer Watchdog, who did the great report also about how fracking has increased 103% under Gavin Newsom. And also what he railroaded through over the long holiday weekend is amendments to the charter school reform bill, which did not surprise me because I did edit a video of him over a year ago addressing the East Area Progressive Dem Club, in which he put Eli Broad, who is trying to privatize public education in this country, on the same footing as the California Teachers Association, which is trying to save public education and the jobs of public school teachers. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into this on Thursday. So as always, I want to ask you to share this show. Follow me on Twitter, Lauren_Steiner, and keep fighting.